Welcome to the Pharmacy Frontiers podcast, a podcast dedicated to the profession of pharmacy. Today, we're excited to turn over the podcast to the students from the St. Louis College of Pharmacy at the University of Health Science and Pharmacy in St. Louis with their podcast titled Dose of Knowledge. We give credit to Professor Stephanie Lucas and Terry Wahalik for mentoring these students for these leadership podcasts. Let me remind everyone that the Pharmacy Frontiers podcast is available for streaming on your favorite podcast streaming app, whether it be Apple, Podbean, Spotify, or YouTube. The comments and opinions shared today are those of the hosts and our guests and are not official statements of the Missouri Pharmacy Association, Mitchell Pharmacy, Mercy, nor the University of Health Sciences and Pharmacy in St. Louis. Now let's hand the microphone over to our students.
Every prescription you've ever filled has been touched by a company you've probably never heard of. They don't invent the drugs, they don't prescribe them, but they get to decide how much you're paying. This episode is about them.
Hey, what's up? This is the Pharmacy Pipeline, where we talk about all things pharmacy. My name is Austin.
I'm Caden.
I'm Melissa.
And I'm Avina. We're second-year pharmacy students at St. Louis College of Pharmacy.
Speaking of pharmacy, the other day I was working at the pharmacy, and this patient was so mad at us because their medication price was a lot higher than what they normally pay. My pharmacist had to explain to him that it wasn't our fault. They didn't change the price of the medication, and neither did the manufacturer. His price changed because of the PBM.
Wait, what exactly is a PBM?
It stands for Pharmacy Benefit Manager. You've never heard of the Middlemen, Caden?
Caden, you're a pharmacy student and you didn't know that? No, but seriously, Austin's story happens all the time. People assume the pharmacist or the drug company raise the price, but most of the time, PBMs are the ones deciding how much patients pay and how much pharmacies get back.
I actually read this really interesting article from the Commonwealth Fund that broke it down. It said PBMs were originally created to help process claims and save people money by negotiating rebates between manufacturers and insurers. But now they've become a lot more influential and a lot less transparent about who and where those savings are going to.
So they were supposed to lower drug prices, but sometimes they end up making them higher?
Pretty much. A study from the National Association of Chain Drugstores in 2024 said that while PBMs can help reduce overall spending, their pricing decisions often happen behind closed doors, making it hard to see who actually benefits from those discounts.
And according to the American Medical Association, 4 PBMs, Optum Rx, CVS Caremark, Evernorth, formerly known as Express Scripts, and Prime Therapeutics control almost 80% of the U.S. market. That's a lot of influence for just a few companies.
4 companies control that much? That's wild. So they decide what's covered, how much we pay, and even how much pharmacies get reimbursed?
Exactly. And the whole system has gotten so complex that even experts are calling for more transparency. In fact, I read this article from American Journal of Health System Pharmacy that explained how PBMs started out managing paperwork in the 1960s, but have since evolved into major players who influence nearly every part of the prescription process.
Wait, that's the same article our guest today co-authored. Dr. Griggs is one of the researchers who wrote about PBM reform and how we can make the system fairer for patients and pharmacies.
Perfect timing then. Let's bring him in to help us unpack how PBMs really work and why they matter so much in healthcare.
Well, first, Dr. Griggs, I would just like to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and talk with us about PBMs. We are really excited to learn more from you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so our main goal for this podcast is to just provide a broad idea of what PBMs are without a strong stance on if they're bad or if they're good. And we felt like you were going to provide us a unique perspective because not only are you a pharmacoeconomics professor, but you also worked as an independent pharmacist and you are also a member of MPA. So again, thank you for joining us. Should we get started?
Certainly.
Okay, perfect. Dr. Griggs, we want to start off by asking you, Since you've experienced both the academic and real-world sides of pharmacy, we wanted to start by asking, as both a pharmacist and a pharmacy professor, what is your opinion on PBMs and their role in the healthcare system today?
Well, so PBMs have a long history going back to the 1960s and 70s. And so PBMs actually have a very important and valuable role in place in the delivery of healthcare, specifically medications for patients. In the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, but especially the last 10 years, we've seen, unfortunately, a consolidation, which includes both mergers and acquisitions, whereby PBMs have become larger and larger. And overall, they've become what's called an oligopoly. An oligopoly means that several, usually in this case three, a few businesses control a market and have a very, very large market share. So even though when we look at PBMs, they've fulfilled a very important and valuable role for a long period of time, what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years is they've gotten really large, and that's what's kind of created some of the problems we're seeing today.
Have you seen any noticeable changes in how vertical integration affects independent versus our chain pharmacies?
So certainly, I think when we talk about the consolidation, the mergers, and you were talking about the vertical integration, first of all, we'd say about maybe 20 years ago, we saw what was called horizontal integration within PBMs, and that's where the mergers and acquisitions would occur, where the PBMs were gobbling up other PBMs in a horizontal fashion. That was problematic in and of itself, but more recently, maybe the last 10 years or so, we've seen what's you referred to as the vertical integration. And vertical integration is where we see that there is a single umbrella company that owns several levels in a healthcare, such as insurers, PBMs, specialty pharmacies, as well as provider services. And the aim of this umbrella, vertically integrated healthcare system is to keep patients' healthcare in-house or to themselves in a closed network. So that would mean that the patient would have less options. For instance, if I have health insurance, I'm pretty much told, okay, if you want to get a reasonable copay, then you must go to this pharmacy, or you must use this mail order, or you must use this doctor. So when we're talking about a vertically integrated healthcare system, the patient has less options, and the business itself maintains that patient throughout the whole process in the different levels.
Yeah, so you're also a member of the Missouri Pharmacy Association, which has been very vocal about PBM reform. So currently, what are the MPA's short-term and long-term goals when it comes to PBM reform?
Yeah, MPA, as well as the national group NCPA, which I'm faculty advisor for here at the St. Louis College of Pharmacy. MPA and NCPA have been very, very vocal in trying to promote transparency as well as fairness to make sure that pharmacies, such as in Missouri, have appropriate prescription reimbursement. That's a whole topic in and of itself. But the important thing there is the MPA wants to pass laws that will help Missouri pharmacies to hold PBMs accountable for harmful business practices.
So what kind of progress has already been made toward these goals, and what challenges are we still facing currently?
Well, some states have been somewhat helpful in passing laws. Ohio would be one that I would say in particular. Ohio has been fairly good at passing laws to try to promote the transparency that we're talking about. Missouri, it's been a little difficult. You know, they say politics is dirty, and unfortunately, we haven't quite gotten there. I will say there was a really important law that started in Arkansas approximately 10 years ago, and that went all the way to the Supreme Court, which said essentially that pharmacy benefit managers cannot pay pharmacies less than what the pharmacy purchased the medication for. So that has actually been rather helpful in the last several years, where some states have been, they've had some positive outcomes with regard to that. If we're looking specifically at some of the issues that they're looking at, it would be transparency, making sure that there's transparency associated with the dealings of PBM. So outside people could look at it and say, okay, we know where the money is going. Spread pricing is another issue, and rebate pass-through. So rebates is another really big issue in regards to pharmacy benefit managers. So looking at transparency, spread pricing, and rebate pass-through, I think those are three of the big issues that MPA and NCPA are looking at.
While PBMs do have some of their challenges, what are some of the positive impacts or roles you think PBMs still play in our healthcare system? Any benefits or things that they do well for patients or pharmacists?
I think this is an important question. I'm glad you asked it. So pharmacy benefit managers do something unique. Let's take a step back. When you go to a dentist or you go to a doctor, do you typically pay a bill? No. I mean, the last time I went to the dentist, it was kind of an interesting interaction, and they said, oh, we'll send you a bill in a month. And you're scratching your head going, why do they have to send me a bill in a month? So I asked them, I said, well, how much it's going to cost. Well, we think it's going to be $30. Okay, in my mind, I have it $30. And a month later, I get the bill, and it's $50. And I call them up, and they say, oh, well, we submitted all the different, items and whatnot, comes back, and it's $50. So the dentist, and oftentimes the doctor, at the time that you get care, doesn't even know what your reimbursement would be. That's very different and unique in pharmacy, in that when you go to the pharmacy, one of the first things a patient will ask is, how much is this going to cost? Well, the process in the pharmacy is that once the prescription is taken by the pharmacist, they run it through the computer. It's called an adjudication process, whereby the prescription with the patient's insurance and the individual and the medication and the doctor is run through the system. And within seconds, the patient and the pharmacy will know what the copay is. So the pharmacy benefit manager is instrumental in that adjudication process. They actually do a lot more than that. So they actually do negotiations with the drug manufacturers, they do negotiations with the employer groups, and they do negotiations with the pharmacies, which is why they're called the middleman, or the entity in the middle that has a lot of control in the contracting and negotiating with all these other different entities. That's actually also how they got, some of the problems arose.
So if you could educate everyone about one thing regarding PBMs, whether that's for patients, providers, or policymakers, what would you say?
Well, I think educating yourself is important initially, and not everybody lives in the pharmacy world. I had an interaction a couple of weeks ago with an acquaintance, somebody I didn't know well, and he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I teach at the College of Pharmacy, the business side of healthcare. I teach a health system management class, pharmacoeconomics. He says, well, what do you talk about? I said, one of the issues we talk about is pharmacy reimbursement, and the topic of PBMs came up. And he said, oh, well, that's interesting. I don't know anything about PBMs. In fact, I've never heard of them. So educating yourself, whether you live in the pharmacy world or you don't live in the pharmacy world, about pharmacy benefit managers is really quite important. And I might actually do a shameless plug and say that myself and a colleague, Sue Bollmeyer, who's here at the St. Louis College of Pharmacy, published an article about a year ago, which is written for just anybody to read. You don't have to be a pharmacy nerd or to know all the details of healthcare economics to follow this. And that article is called "The Role of Pharmacy Benefit Managers in Skyrocketing Costs of Medications." And this was from Missouri Medicine, September, October 2024. This would give somebody a nice broad overview. So what's the one thing you can do? You can educate yourself. Now, the next step, if I was going to take one more step, is I would say the employers in businesses, especially the HR, are the ones that contract with the insurance companies, and making sure that HR is aware of this. More and more are becoming aware, but you can know something yourself if you're going to take the next step and make a change, a positive change for your business and for healthcare in general. Educating the HR and the folks that do the negotiations for the business, I think, would be the next step, which would really, really be important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Griggs, for sharing your insights and taking time to talk with us. We really appreciate hearing about the pharmacist and the economic side of PBMs and getting to understand this in more of a balanced way.
Well, I'm glad I had the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this conversation gave us and our listeners a clearer view of how PBMs impact not only patient care, but also the entire pharmacy system. Thank you again for being part of our podcast.
It's a pleasure.
All right, guys, I can confidently say I know who PBMs are, what they do, and why there's so much conflict around them. They're supposed to be lowering costs, but the way they're working sounds like they're just hurting pharmacies and raising drug prices because they can.
Ugh, so close, Kaden. PBMs aren't out there raising drug prices just for fun. They were, however, designed to lower overall costs through rebates and formulary management. The issue is that their methods can sometimes create unintended consequences like reduced transparency or higher out-of-pocket costs for patients.
That's why pharmacists and organizations like the Missouri Pharmacy Association are fighting for PBM reform to make the system more transparent and fair for patients and pharmacies.
Okay, so no matter how you feel about PBMs, one thing has to be clear. Patients deserve affordable medications and transparent pricing. As future pharmacists, it's not just about filling the correct medication, it's about advocating for the patients and understanding the system.
I agree, Melissa. PBMs are one of the many complicated parts of our healthcare system, but they're not going away anytime soon. So the best thing we can do is help educate each other about them.
This is why conversations like this are so important, because the more we talk about PBMs, insurance, and legislation, the less mysterious they become. As pharmacy students, learning about these systems now will prepare us to explain them clearly to our patients later.
So what I'm hearing is that it is a good thing I was confused at the beginning, because we wouldn't have had this conversation if I knew everything about PBMs in the first place.
Sure, Caden. Whatever makes you feel better.
Okay, before this turns into an Austin versus Caden podcast, let's just agree that PBMs are confusing.
Yeah, but hey, on the bright side, I think we've officially solved 1% of the mystery behind PBMs. I call that progress.
Thanks, guys, for explaining PBMs in a way that makes sense. I really do understand who they are and what their role is a lot better now, and I hope our listeners do too. The more we know, the better we can help our patients. If you enjoyed learning about PBMs and want to dive deeper, there are some great resources out there. Stat News is a great one to keep up with current PBM-related headlines, constant updates on policy changes, and drug pricing trends. You can also check out AMCP legislation and regulation website, which covers managed care topics and provides updates from pharmacists and PBM affiliates working to improve access and transparency in healthcare.
A big thank you, students, for hosting the Dose of Knowledge podcast as part of the Pharmacy Frontiers. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. Please share this episode with your friends and seek out other Dose of Knowledge podcasts on the Pharmacy Frontiers podcast page that can be found on your favorite podcast channel.